everyone. I'm here today with Tim Blueflint Ramel, who is a jewelry and diverse artist. He is from the tribes Chippewa and Comanche. Hello, Tim.
Hey, good morning, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks.
Uh,
Good to
um,
be here. Good to see you. Virtually,
yeah,
sort of,
yeah.
kind of. This is a cool
Uh,
joint.
well, thank you. We built this so that we can have an additional space for artists to participate in. I want to get started here and really get to know a little bit about you. How did you get started making your artwork?
Well, I can't remember a time that I didn't create artwork, to be honest with you. One of the earliest things I did, I think, was in grade school, and my dad had it above his easy chair my whole life and his whole life, and it was like some little school project. But I actually grew up around artists. My dad was quite an artist. Not very many people knew it. He was a closet artist. My grandmother was a pretty well known silversmith. My uncle was also a silversmith, and so I just always grew up around art, and there was always artists in and out of the house all the time. So it just seemed natural, I've always been interested in art. I never had any formal schooling, but for our family, I mean, art and the enjoyment of art and creating art, that was just part of our family makeup. And then when I got into high school, I was required to take an art class, and I had this great teacher that really expanded my worldview of art. She instilled in me this love of Dutch masters and the Hudson River paintings and the Taos masters, and that was when I really started to see art in a little different light. People say that sometimes when you're around things, you just take it for granted because it just is, and that may have been early on with me, because it was just always around us. But when I got into high school and started to really appreciate different art forms and different artists and classical and Renaissance, and it's like the light switch turned on. So I was always creating, and then when I was a teenager, my grandmother would have all of her friends come in and teach me different traditional arts. So I learned how to do beadwork, and I learned how to tan hides and make regalia and all of these different things. And I also messed around in her silver studio, underneath her guys. And my grandmother used to say, "It's okay, just learn the skills because you never know when, where, or how you'll apply these different skills." After high school, of course, you get busy in life, and I spent 30 years in sales and sales management and sales training. And then about 2009, 2010, I walked away from corporate life to become a full time artist. I started playing flutes about 15 years before, started making flutes about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years before that. And it's been a wild ride, man.
That's interesting to hear the foundation, and from family to the early learning and who we were inspired by, how that leads into what you're doing currently as an artist. What types of artwork have you started making now?
Well, it's an interesting thing. One of the things that I've learned is when people come to me and collectors come to me and they say, "Hey, can you do this?" One of the things that I've learned not to do is not to say no. I was making flutes, and I had a really wonderful collector in Indianapolis, and she came to me and she said, "Hey, listen, I know your background. I know that your grandmother is a silversmith and your uncle is a silversmith. I really want a flute and I really want a silver turtle on it. Can you do it?" Well, I didn't have any tools. And I said, "Well, heck yeah, I can do it." And I said, "In fact, you know what we ought to do? We ought to inlay malachite in the back of the turtle's shell And she's like, yeah, let's do that. And I said, well, maybe I think a turtle like that should have black diamond eyes. Yeah, let's do that. Can you make me a necklace to match? You bet I can. How many strands do you want? Do you want a single strand or I want a multi-strand? Okay. I had no idea how to cast silver. Our family never did. We were fabricators. And so I gathered all the tools, I started to gather all the tools, and she said, "Well, how long is this going to take, this project?" I said, I don't know." And there was silence on the phone, and then she said, "Well, how much is it going to cost?" And I said, "I have no clue." And there was a little more silence, and then and then she said, "Let's do this." And I think that by not saying no, we leave the door open, for new experiences and expansion. And it's completely changed that one job, that one commission changed my whole life, and in a really interesting way. Not only did it move it forward, but it also took me back to my childhood, and took me back to the times that I would spend with my grandmother, in the studio. These doors opening and these blessings and these things, they come from seemingly what can be the smallest little thing, the smallest little request, and just not saying no, and being open to kicking out the walls of the box.
So that's kind of the example that we see in a lot of your flutes then that's being made now, and your jewelry.
Yeah, I always want to move forward, and even with flutes, the reason that I started making flutes was because I used to remember my grandfather playing, and there was this sound, and all of his old man friends would come over and play in my grandma's kitchen. And when I started playing flutes, I started playing on the old type flutes that were tuned to your body measurements. So there was no discernible Western scale, and my grandfather used to tell me, well, you have to find the song that's in the flute, rather than like the Western school of thought of music is, to make the instrument perform the way that you want it to, the way that you expect it to, rather than looking at it as a separate entity and a living thing and creating a relationship with it. For example, Eric, you and I go to the music store, right? And we're going to buy a guitar. So we go in and we pick out a guitar. Now we know that when we strum this guitar initially, we expect a certain key. We expect to hear a certain sound, which is typically the key of G, because that's the way that guitars are tuned. Sometimes they may have an alternate tuning of the key of E, but there's always that certain sound, right? And if it doesn't sound like that, what's the first thing that we do? Well, we start turning the tuning keys, and we try to make that instrument conform to what we expect it to be. And flutes, really, in the old days, they were just the opposite. They were an extension of our voice. And and in many ways, the evolution of the flute has changed that, to where now, what I make, typically, not always, I still get requests for the old time flutes that are tuned to somebody's body dimensions, but typically they're Western concert tuned. And so what happened, as I progressed in my flute making, I realized that the flute had two things that it could be. And one is, it could be a world class instrument that would be perfectly tuned and would be comfortable at home out in the woods, or in a living room, or in a concert hall anywhere in the world, if one would take the time and the effort to tune it to Western standards. That was the first thing. The second thing is it had the potential to be more than just a functional item. It actually had the potential to be fine art. And so those were the two things that I set out to try and do, was to create something that not only sounded beautiful to the modern ear and standards, but also could be considered functional art. So that evolved, as I was trying to evolve the flute itself, and not just me. There were people before me that started that. I just wanted to take it to a higher and more refined level. Moving into jewelry and combining combining those two mediums at one point just seemed to be a natural progression. It seemed to be just the way that evolution just was supposed to go.
On this course of developing and changing and evolving and merging knowledge, with all these perspectives, where do you see yourself going from here?
The beautiful thing is I can't really answer that question. Um, because I feel like if I answer it, if I can answer it, then I'm putting myself in a box, and I don't want that. I don't want to be. I don't want to be in that box. I want to be open. I want to grow, and I want to expand my knowledge base. And that's one of the interesting things, that I've been doing this year since we haven't had any shows or anything. I've been investing in myself, and it's one of the hardest things as an artist to invest in, especially in tough times, because we're all trying to figure out, how we're going to pay the rent at the end of the month. We're all trying to figure out how we're going to feed our family, maintain our livelihood, just like everybody else. Sometimes we have to invest in things that don't have an immediate return, and especially in the hard times. So I've been investing in new tools. I've been exploring new techniques, new practices. It's really been an interesting year of reflection and revelation. I'm really excited for the future because I think it's going to be amazing, and we don't know where it's going to go. One of the things that I actually just did yesterday was I interviewed and I hired a firm that is going to help me with my social media. And that's hard money to spend because there's definitely no immediate return. Regardless of how our world moves forward, our community moves forward out of this pandemic, promoting ourselves virtually, promoting ourselves through social media is going to be a huge reality, even when the shows start to come back. And I think that by trying to keep on the forefront and to imagine what we can be, and then to break that down into the steps, well, how do we get to where we imagine? Forward movement is forward movement, no matter how small it is. And when you're on a slippery slope, sometimes you got to fight harder to get a little bit of traction. But if we put in that effort and we put in that time, the rewards can be amazing and long lasting, not just immediate. And that's why one of the things that I think is amazing that SWAIA has done, and they've been so very supportive. And let's face it, not everything has worked the way that we envisioned it or wanted it to. Even in those instances, there's lessons to be learned and there's opportunities to be realized, and we have to capitalize on every opportunity, and we have to remember every lesson. So the extra effort that you've put in, that all the people at SWAIA have put in, the fresh ideas that Kim have brought, and here we are trying to create something out of nothing. You guys have worked your tails off, and I just want to give you props and thank you, not just for me, but I mean really for the whole native art community. You guys have been amazing.
Thank you again, Tim, for your time and helping us with this idea for using Indian World as a space where artists can come and share their information, share their stories. I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I'm happy to help. We'll talk soon, okay?
All right.